which might be a way to recruit new people for new technology. But then, if you're also learning the new technology on the job and you don't have anyone else helping establish good foundations for what your workflow is going to look like, or your development patterns are going to be, or making that the elusive, back to the whole theme of maintainable, is one of my goals is to fight the big rewrite, because oftentimes rewrites fail because people drastically underestimate what it really takes to go through to not only build out a new application, but to keep the existing one going in parallel, and then dealing with that migration at some point. And so a lot of failed upgrade projects out there.
You just heard the voice of Robby Russell, today's guest. If you missed the first part of the interview, I encourage you to go back and listen to that part before you listen to this one. In this episode, we continue discussing issues of maintainability, which is a subject that Robby and his team at Planet Argon are experts on. Go and check out what they are doing. Head over to planetargon.com. My name is Jonathan Cottrell. You're listening to Developer Tea, and my goal on this show is to help driven developers like you find clarity, perspective, and purpose in their careers. This is the second part of my interview with Robby Russell. Let's jump straight in to the interview. Yeah, a lot of this comes back to good software design. But I love this point that you make about resume-driven development, because I do think that there is, it is totally reasonable to think about the economics for the individual, right?
Yes, totally.
It's very, very unlikely that each developer on a team is willing to say, "I'm staying here for the rest of my life." That's almost certainly not going to happen. And so it's necessary also for engineering leaders, right? Managers or engineering kind of team leads, whatever that position is in your organization, to stay aware of this, right? And say, hey, you know what? There's an opportunity that will advance your career despite your position here or elsewhere. Like, this is a good opportunity for you to work in this direction, rather than letting that become a kind of the primary goal. Let it become a side effect. And this, or I guess design it to be a side effect, right? The hope would be that you're solving problems, and naturally, as you solve problems, your kind of your resume or your external worth to the company grows in tandem, right? There can be certainly a dual win scenario, right?
Sure,
where both sides are happier at the end. But it's important to recognize that it doesn't come by just allowing engineering to chase any direction they want to chase, right? They being us. We have to be intentional about what we're choosing. It's very easy, like you said, to say, you know what, we want to do microservices because that's a new best practice. All three of us here at this company are excited to do 10 microservices together. And that just doesn't always make sense. And so making good decisions, right? This is perhaps the most important takeaway, I think, from this, little diversion here. Making good decisions is a more important thing for your resume in the long term than any technology you can put on that list. If you can explain in a well-reasoned way why you made a particular decision, even when it was a hard one, when it was not in vogue, right? We went with a monolith on purpose. Here's why, right? Those kinds of discussions are, for good employers at least, are much more valuable than any buzzword, because there are 1,000 employees or potential employees who have those buzzwords on their resume too. Microservices are not a unique thing. So that's not what's going to differentiate you. If you want differentiation, if you're a new engineer and you want differentiation, explain your decision making. Make decisions that are well-reasoned and well thought out. As it turns out, that is more rare than it seems. Would you agree with this?
Very, very much so. It's, I was even just thinking recently, I was talking to some interns about, we'll look over their resumes and their cover letters to get an idea of how they're pitching themselves as they're looking for their, their forever development home as as I enter this career. But there's this interesting thing with resumes where it's just like, here's a big list of all the things, or even like proficiency percentages on specific technology stacks. I'm like, but tell me about how you, yeah, I think you make a good point about like, talk about the impact you've made and the decisions you've helped make, and how you've influenced things, and the things you might even consider, in retrospect. I feel like I would probably definitely redo this in a different way now. And I think being able to speak to that, I think is I think if anything, we know as developers, it's always like it depends is like the start of every one of our questions or answers to a question. And I think we should be able to show nuance a bit more in our, our introductions and resumes and our interviewing process to, I want to know how you're thinking about these problems. And because I'm looking to hire someone not can just spit out code. That's like an artifact of the work that you're doing, but you're here to solve problems for our clients, and being able to articulate why you think and believe this approach might be more valuable, but not do it with an air of overconfidence that this is the only way to do it. This might be helpful, but there's kind of like showing there's some give and take there, and helping guide people towards like, let's experiment with this type of approach or something, and can be an effective way of doing that too. But getting a little off course there. But I think but I agree. The resume is focused too much on the tech stacks to some degree, and not enough on like the impact you've been able to make.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And I think that's, that brings us into, and you mentioned internships, actually. This is another topic that we discussed beforehand that you've been interested in recently, because I think there's a lot of overlap here about understanding not just, what are the good decisions and how do you align those with growing your resume, but how do you kind of create that as a habit early on in your career. So I'd love for you to kind of explain how you are conducting your technical internships today and why.
Well, let's see. So we started doing for a long time. I think a lot of people that I talked to didn't think we had the time, and I think if we're really being honest, the confidence in our ability to provide a meaningful internship experience to someone. So, I think since the beginning of the company, we've had people contact us that were like just about to graduate, or maybe they're a year away from graduation and they have a summer off and they want to find somewhere to intern for a couple of months. And they reach out and we're like, I don't really know. Like, I'm busy doing client stuff. Do I have time in the capacity to really be helpful here? And so we kept putting it off. I'm like, I don't think this is something we can do, until one day someone reached out, and it was on a day where I was already thinking about the idea of being a mentor, just in general, and like how I was being a mentor to people on the team. And so someone reached out and said that they were looking for an internship. And I was like, you know what, I'll at least have a conversation with this person and kind of get a sense of where they're at. We ended up bringing them in and taking a gamble. We're like, okay, we'll do our best. And behind the scenes, our leadership team, we're like, let's try to screw this up. Let's just make sure that they have a meaningful internship experience. And we kind of winged it, and it worked out okay. That person, we ended up hiring them, and they worked for us for like about 5 years. And so that was then. And then I think it must be about 6-7 years ago, we paired up with a local boot camp here in Portland, Oregon, in the United States, where part of their curriculum at the end of their, I think it's like 28, 30 weeks boot camp, they place interns, well, their students on site at a company for another 5 weeks, and then to get some more real world experience. And so for us, it seemed like an easy enough type of thing to set up for. We're like, okay, we don't need to like put up an ad and like interview a bunch of people. We're going to interview like 6 people, and then they're going to kind of randomly pick 2 of them that actually get assigned to us. But at least they're getting 6 of those people are going to get experience of going through some interviews, and then we'll have those people come in for 5 weeks, and then there's a very clear time window for that. And so we kind of took that and learned from that over the years. And so early on, so let's fast forward to now what we're doing, kind of based off of, in the spirit of time here. So when people come in, and there's kind of like this pre and during COVID scenario as well, we like it's a Wednesday that when we're recording it on Friday, it's the end of one of our interns' last days on Friday. And so this was the first time we've ever done fully remote internships. And we were really nervous about doing that because we had never done it before. And we've always really appreciated doing that in person because our company culture, we've always been in-house together in the same office space. And now with COVID, that's all out the window. And I don't know if we'll ever be a fully on-site company again. And that's a topic for another day. But so with our internship program, people come in and we've now set it up where historically we would put them on pet projects. Might be some internal things, some small internal apps we wanted to work on, or even some like kind of projects that they would kind of get to experiment with. And we had a set of features we were looking to them to build, and we provide feedback on them. And then those projects may or may not see the day of light at the end of it. And we learned that felt really ineffective for everyone involved, and from the people on our end and for the interns, and that they didn't really feel like it mattered if they finished the project because they didn't know if it was ever going to get used anyways. And I don't think that felt good. So I think about 3 or 4 years ago, we started to work with some of our clients. We had a couple clients in particular that we've been working with for a number of years where we felt like we had a decent level of trust there that we could go in and say, hey, we're going to be bringing interns in. We're going to get 2 interns for the next 5-6 weeks. And we want them to work on your application. And it's a large, scary application. But we want to introduce them to the idea of working on an existing older code base and work on something that will make some valuable contribution to your code base and also have the experience of getting to interact with the client. And we'll do that for free. So if you're willing to, have a few Jira comic conversations and maybe a phone call or two and talk with them a little bit and give them some feedback at times, that would be kind of, that's the trade. So we've established that with a number of our clients now, where they'll come, our interns will show up, and our onboarding experience is to bring them into an older code base, which, if you think about a lot of boot camps, is most likely going to be a scenario where they're learning a lot of building blocks, building new things. And then all of a sudden you get this, nobody starts their first job, at least very rarely, and gets to work on a new application. It's like we were talking about earlier, you're joining a company that has been established. There's likely an established application, code bases that have been around for a while, team, documentation, and it's intimidating and scary to be an intern and a junior developer coming into this industry and looking at a really large application where you're like, whoa, this application has how many hundreds of database tables? I've created a couple dozen in my career so far. So we'll see that transition where we'll send them a few small features, or bug fixes is also a good one, where like that first week they're getting up and running with the application, and then they start looking at the area code base, and you can just see just how intimidated they are. But then you'll see 3 or 4 weeks later, how confident they feel about working within an existing application. So that to me is, I think, one of the most valuable things that I think we can do in an internship program, is to really expose them to like what it's going to be like to have that first experience at their first job, to help let them know like, okay, I can get through this, and we're here to help guide them. And then the other things that we're also doing is, we have a lot of planned, scheduled pairing time with our interns. So we have a toolkit that you can download on our website too, for this whole kind of maps out our whole program, but for other people that are trying to set this up themselves. But a big thing for us is to pre-plan, not so much what they're going to do on a day-to-day basis, but knowing that there's going to be scheduled time to either shadow or pair with other developers during their internship period. And one of the things that we always find to be really valuable, outside of just getting to work on existing code bases, but when they're pairing or even shadowing a developer that's working on some other area of the application, is just to see how they're working. And they're often surprised. Some things they'll talk about things that they learned, like, wow, I didn't realize that senior developers Googled so much, and they need to look this stuff up too. And they're like, oh, I don't have to remember all this stuff at the top of my head, or they'll go look up the documentation on how to split this array properly. They don't just remember all these things. And so like that helps to boost their confidence. Like, okay, like I'm not going to get fired at my first job if someone looks over my shoulder and sees that I'm looking up some documentation on something that they think I should know already. And so
Yeah.
because that is a lot of what, there's a lot of things to remember. We don't all remember everything. And if you're someone out there that would judge someone on Googling for the documentation, that maybe think about your priorities there. But but I think trying to give them, expose them to what it's like to interact with as part of a team, so they get the experience of working on pull requests and the cycle there, working on tests and squashing bugs and sending things over for approval, dealing with the feedback. We also try to plan out projects in their internship period that we don't have a high level of confidence that they're going to be able to complete, and we'll tell them, we'll explain that about. I mean, like we share, our toolkit with them early on, so if they read ahead, they can see that we do that. Try to be transparent about it. But I think an important part of the team experience is to be able to hand off work to other people, and so we're always trying to think of, if you're not going to, there's a cutoff when your internship's going to end. And I know you really want to finish this feature or project, but you're going to have to wrap it up and organize it so that someone else can pick it up and continue working on it. And so what does that process look like? And so that way you don't just leave a branch that sits there, and then what ends up happening, if there's nothing people can really pick it up, that branch just gets tossed, and then when someone decides to clean it up at some point. So I think that's another thing to think about, is giving people that experience of trying to prepare work to pass it over to someone is another thing. So
yeah,
and then, so, outside of just trying to make sure that they get exposed to real projects and not on some fun, weird internal pet projects. And that the other part of that is that helps them really think about how they can promote what they did when they're applying for jobs, and I was able to work on this project, they can drop one of our, some of our client names are pretty high profile, and they can be I worked with so-and-so company that those people might have heard of, and I helped improve the performance of their homepage by 12% or what have you. And knowing that they were able to play a part of that, that's a good little resume line item to include there. Another thing that we're strongly opinionated about, which some people can be surprised by, is that we intentionally do not see this as a recruitment pipeline tool for us. And so very upfront, we are not going to hire you. And that might feel harsh, but on the other end, I feel like it's very kind to set that parameter, because the thing about, because we've hired interns in the past, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I'm never ever going to hire an intern, but as a general rule, no. This is a fixed period of time, and in order for us to continue offering this to other people, we need to enforce our own boundaries here. Because if we hire the people, we might not feel like we have the ability to continue operating this program to the next round of interns that we want to bring in. So we're trying to do this. We're trying to bring in at least 8 to 12 interns every year. We're having to shift that around a little bit with COVID, but as we just started doing it again, we just wrapped up 3 internships, and over this last couple months now. And for me, it's also how that's an important thing to bake into my team's culture, is that they're going to be regularly expected to help onboard new people onto the team for a period of time and provide mentorship, guide them, and then help consult them on how to think about their career, the type of direction they might explore. And I think we touched on the whole being consultant versus a product company. It's one of the things we try to bring up early on in those conversations about hey, how's your job hunt going? Because those junior developers and interns that are you might be working with, they're nervous about rejection, and so they will put that off and maybe hope that maybe they'll be they'll get to stick around for a while. So I don't want to squash that hope necessarily, but I want them focused on we're here to prep you for your job. And so we're let's look at your resumes, let's look at your cover letters that you're sending out, and and cheerleading them to a degree of helping them feel confident as they go into interviews. And we've had people get hired before they finish their internships here. We have someone finishing on Friday, and I sent over some feedback to her yesterday on her cover letters, and she said, "Hey," she replied to me a little while ago before our interview, and she's like, "Just an FYI, I got a job interview tomorrow at this really big company, and if that doesn't work out, this other company offered me a paid internship just as a fallback." And I'm like, "That's awesome!" Like,
That's great.
like,
Yeah.
that's, to me, that's the most successful thing, is seeing that they're able to take that next step, and we're getting to be maybe a stepping stone part of their career. And who knows, maybe long term the payoff for us is they'll be at some company for a long time, and they'll have some leverage at some point to recommend a company like Planet Argon to be a consultant for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think it's amazing because my career was so much impacted by my internship. And I don't think that the company, I actually interned also at a consultancy. I don't think that they saw the internship as a pipeline for hiring necessarily, although they had hired interns before. But what I saw it as was an opportunity to be around a bunch of people who, frankly, knew way more than I did about what I was doing, far more. And I made many mistakes in that internship. And I look back on that very gratefully, both for the experience and the people that I was able to meet as a part of the experience. And I think that the company was, in ways, providing that to people as a service, right? Internships are not an easy thing to figure out, but they also are doing it because it makes them better at a lot of different things. Companies are improved by internships, in my opinion, not just because it is a hiring pipeline, or in your case, it's not, right? But because it allows you an opportunity to investigate things through a different lens. Investigate your own work and your own processes and your own culture through a different lens, especially.
Yes.
Right? And I think that is such a critically valuable opportunity that if it was just that, if you had just the perspective shift, the internships would be worth it just for that. But I'm interested in what you believe is the most important lesson or thing that you've learned for your company as a result of doing these internships.
Something you just mentioned, where you get this other lens. This one of the at least a valuable part as the owner of my company is that I can, when I'll do a quick check-in early on within their internship, and then towards the end, and I'll ask them to describe our company and culture as a new person, right? And then I'll ask them a very similar question towards the end and see how much that changes over that period of time. And sometimes it could be maybe even some level, they're always going to be happy and excited to be there. And so you take it, try to take it with some grain of salt, but I should also accept like the positive feedback and the praise that they might have for the organization that I've helped build over the years, and the team culture and how the team works together. So in a lot of ways, I think the most valuable thing that I feel like I personally get is some validation that we have a very thoughtful, mindful team that cares a lot about the well-being of their peers. Because I think that always comes through with interns in particular, where they just feel like, I felt like I belonged here. I feel like I was part of the team. I wasn't like the other guest that was just kind of roaming around. Like, you made me feel like I was part of this team. I'm sad to now leave it. And so that, in a way, feels good, and something that I'm glad that we can kind of facilitate. But ultimately, it's the, for the team, the expectation for everybody that's, all of my full-time employees, that they're all getting that experience of providing mentorship and getting past the I don't have time to answer questions from someone that may have less experience than me, or even just maybe help remove some of that ego, because there's things that they know that they can't answer. And so I think it helps combat that in a way where everybody on the team is expected to participate with interns in some level. We bring in interns for other roles as well in the organization. So it's not just developers. So everybody has those experiences. So it's just baked into our team DNA that we're constantly having to learn how to onboard and mentor people, because then we can do that with the people we bring on full time and be really successful there. Because as a consultant, when we got brought into these other companies where they have a team that's been around and they're bringing in, I mentioned that story earlier with the old guard and the new guard type of situation, where the old guard didn't have any mentoring skills whatsoever, and maybe in some ways it was too late to help train them or help them overcome that. And I don't worry about the people that work here at Planet Argon going on, at least, for the remainder of their time here, but also as they go on in the rest of the industry and their future jobs, that they're going to carry those skill sets and be able to bring that value and keep just help build a more inclusive and empathetic and thoughtful, mindful culture to the industry. And so I feel like that to me is something I feel like is a legacy that I can be proud of knowing that, like, oh, we made these decisions and this is a way that the company has been able to help kind of like the big picture type of thing. Financially, can I say it's great? I mean, it can be, I think that it's hard to kind of weigh that up. It's a cost to us, but I think but I feel like it's an interesting way of professional development that it is kind of helps people more on an intrinsic level.
Yeah, this is actually, so I'm going to give you kind of a parallel practice that I've been kind of playing around with as a manager for a long time. The idea of doing high-level demos within an organization, and doing so not just for the engineering team or department, but also inviting other people, okay, stakeholders, etc., and allowing the individual contributors to do those demos. Now, what this provides is some forcing functions, and I think internships also provide some forcing functions that are similar, which is why I bring it up. The first thing that it allows is it allows everybody to see the more specific details of the work that's being done. So there's some translation work that's happening, right, from engineers to product folks, et cetera. But there's also the opportunity and perhaps the imperative for engineers to consider their work through the lens of someone who isn't an engineer. What does that work mean to the stakeholder? What does it mean to, let's say, other teams, other engineers on other teams that don't necessarily know about the specific problems that you're facing? And how can you concisely convey that message in 5 minutes? And this is a hugely valuable exercise, even if you didn't have a demo, if you were just required to make a demo, right? Because what it forces, and not in a coercive way, but I guess it's more of an invitation. What it invites individual contributors to do is to understand things at a high level and to be able to translate all of the work that they're doing, like you said, in those PRs, right? In those individual commit messages, translate all of that and summarize it into something that is consumable by almost anybody on the team. In a similar way, if you have interns that are on your various teams, right? Let's say you had a team of 5 engineers and there's an intern that makes up number 6. Those 5 engineers now have the open opportunity, no matter what level they are at, they have the open opportunity to act as a mentor to that younger intern engineer. And even if that is not explicitly identified, that is kind of the dynamic that's set up, right? The kind of full-time engineer and the intern are sitting next to each other, or they're working in the same PR. That intern is going to have a chance to ask questions. And the otherwise junior engineer, who may see themselves at the bottom of the proverbial totem pole, they get an opportunity to actually teach, to lead somebody, to start flexing or exercising those muscles that they're going to need for the longevity of their career, and doing so early rather than waiting until they're 10 or 15 years down the road and they've forgotten what it means to be a beginner, right? So I think these are really important ways. These are these kinds of what may feel like, if you're an engineer listening to this right now, and you think, oh, why is management making us do this stuff, right? I just want to code. I just want to get my work done and go home and be happy. And for some people, that's a completely reasonable way to go through your career. But for engineers who are going to grow into leadership positions, for engineers who are going to eventually, for example, potentially jump tracks to being a manager and all of these kinds of moves that you could grow in your career with, those management tactics that you're hearing about is largely because of this, because it's going to enable something that just coding on your own is not necessarily going to enable.
Such a good point there. You're right. It'd be interesting for me to actually go back and track a little bit, but I think we bring on junior developers, and it is often one of the cited reasons why our internship thing is so helpful, is that it helps improve those people's confidence so quickly that they're like, oh, I'm actually able to help someone else kind of. And in some ways, like they might feel like, oh, they're a peer, or they're only like 12 months behind me. But, we're kind of like, it's like you get up that next ladder step and you're like, oh, let me help the next person up behind me. It's such a good, I think, good thing to feel for those people to go through an experience, for sure. And they build up those long-term, skill sets. And as you said, moving in potentially into management positions, or just being a good teammate, I think is important.
Today's episode is sponsored by New Relic. New Relic is observability made simple. Monitoring a complex digital architecture takes dozens of different tools, and troubleshooting ends up meaning jumping between tons of dashboards and data. And New Relic wants to change this problem. They've designed everything you need in 3 products. The first is a telemetry data platform, which creates a fully manageable schemaless time series database of all your data from any source. The second is a full stack observability for analyzing, visualizing, and troubleshooting your whole stack. And finally, applied intelligence that seamlessly automates anomaly detection and incident intelligence correlation using AI and ML. That sounds like a mouthful, but really what it comes down to is being the one place that you go to understand what's going on with your application. Not just reading logs, by the way, not just looking through a bunch of kind of logged issues. This isn't what New Relic does. New Relic gives you better insights because it's higher order software. This isn't just, sticking in between your logger and logging that out to New Relic and allowing you to search that information. It's much more than that. And of course, the best part is that you get all of that for free. There's no host-based pricing and no constant upsell for more functionality. You get 100 gigabytes a month to one full access user. Head over to newrelic.com to learn more. New Relic is observability made simple. Thanks again to New Relic for sponsoring today's episode of Developer Tea. Because a lot of times teams tend to kind of homogenize, right? You have the senior engineers kind of work together, right? And then you put the junior engineers on their own project because they kind of speak the same language. But when you put them together, something kind of unique forms out of that, and it's difficult. That's the hard part, is that you're kind of creating a difficult scenario. Those demos are difficult. Internships are difficult. They are, because it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to be, as a junior engineer, to be asked questions, right? It's exciting. It's not a bad kind of negative consequences kind of uncomfortable. It's growth kind of uncomfortable. And so I do think that those kinds of situations produce growth for both sides. And it is an investment, to your point. It's not a free thing. It's an investment. Robby, thank you so much for joining me on Developer Tea. I want to ask you questions that I like to ask every guest who comes on the show, if you have just a few more minutes here.
Yeah, definitely, Jonathan.
So the first question I want to ask you is, what do you wish more people would ask you about?
I can tell you, I wish people didn't ask me what I did for a living, but because I think
that was the first question I asked you.
I know, but I wish people would ask me what are you focused on right now? And I think that in a way, just because if anything, to help me focus as an owner of a business sometimes where there's a lot of things going on, and it's easy enough for me to report on here's my priorities right now. But I think there's like a certain level, if there's like a certain level of focus in my life right now, like I've got a number of different projects outside of, being an owner of a business to, helping lead a popular open source project to, running, like having a band and playing music, just other things in my life right now. So that I'm a project oriented person. So I wish people asked me more about what new projects are you working on, or like, what are you focused on? I think is always an interesting thing. And so it's a question I like to ask other people.
It's a difficult question to answer, I think, for a lot of people because they think categorically, right? What do you mean? What am I focused? Am I focused on at work? What am I focused on, internally? Where is that focus at? So I'm interested, do you see that? I know a lot of entrepreneurs don't really draw really hard lines between those things. Do you see that overlap kind of blurring, or do you see them distinctly in terms of your focus? And what are you focused on right now?
There is overlap especially, in the time of COVID, where the barriers for like physical space separation of, I'm been working primarily at my kitchen table for the past 6 months. And so I don't know where the barriers are anymore. And I don't get to play music with my band right now because we're not all able to go practice together and feel safe doing that. But so focus is, I think it's interesting. So great question. So, jokingly say that I am focused on trying to find barriers, I suppose, to create more separation right now in this world where separation is hard to find. So like actively, I think the last several weeks, it's been, my role has shifted recently at my company. We were able to, for the last 3-4 years, I've been directly managing the software developers on our team. And we recently just hired a new engineering manager. They've been here for 30 days now. And so my role has been able to switch quite a bit, where I used to have, a number of one-on-ones, and now I have 2 direct reports instead of 9 to 10. So that's like a context or a switch that I'm navigating. So I'm trying to figure out what my new focus looks like over the next, quarter, and trying to define those barriers to be like, okay, I want to make sure I have enough of me to, when I'm home with my fiance, to talk about the projects in our world, that I can, show up and be present for that. And I try to be very mindful, not allowing my, something I think I'm always constantly working on is not drawing the success of my business as to be the same thing as the success of me as a human being on the planet. That's I think a tricky thing to kind of walk the line as a business owner at times, but especially you've been doing it your whole adult life. So yeah, I'm focused on trying to like navigate that too, to create some boundaries, not because I feel like it's bleeding over necessarily too much. It's just wanting to show up in each of those contexts and feel more focused within those contexts, rather than feeling like, okay, I show up and I'm in my dining room area and I'm like, okay, I got to work on these projects for work. And then I also got to get back to the band about these things. I got to work on, get back to the nonprofit. And it's like, I feel like in some ways it's, my to-do list is maybe too widespread. And so it's too blurry. And that's creating maybe a difficult level of finding some focus within each of those confines.
This is a problem that I have as well. And I'm interested in what you think about this, because I think, I have a lot going on. And it seems like even though I'm not going anywhere, like you said, I'm kind of staying at home, I have a bunch of these home projects and things like that, I feel perhaps more busy than ever. Partially as a parent, a stay-at-home parent during a pandemic. But I'm wondering, do you think that the separation, we know that we're not good at multitasking, for example, right? That's not going to happen. I'm not going to be able to spend quality time with my children and also work at the same time. I have to separate those things out. Do you think the separation will give us a sense that we're able to get more done? All right, so that's maybe one option. I'm going to give you one other option. And of course, the floor is open for you to add a third. But do you think it'll give us a sense that we're getting more done? Or do you think that separation will help us understand that we don't need to do as much?
I'm going to go with the latter there. I think it's more, I feel like it's easy in some ways to feel busy right now. Because there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of things to tend to, a lot of things to do. And so I can't speak for you or for other people, but for myself, I've got big to-do lists, and I can go through and like, okay, I'm checking off all these things and I'm getting a lot done. And I think in some ways for me to think of me improving my focus is not necessarily so I can go, okay, cool, I can get more to-dos done today. It's more about that. I think in this space right now, as we're in the US, there's a lot of things going on right now and in the world as well. And I think there's like the hard part for me right now is I think there's a lack of permanence. And I think there's always I think if in some ways, for many years, I was always trying to be very careful about not getting attached and think too long-term about decisions. And I think in a weird way now, I kind of miss that it's hard to make long-term decisions about anything because we don't really know what 3-6 months looks like anymore. Can we, is my office going to open back up again? Do we get rid of our lease? Those are big business decisions that, I'm kind of hemming and hawing over for quite a while about, but it's if those things feel permanent, to make these I'm how will this impact the company if I make that sort of decision? And how can I really come up with an annual plan right now when it feels like we're kind of in this weird reactive world, and how can I feel proactive again? And so if anything, focuses me thinking, okay, I need to focus on just these few things that I feel like are going to have the most impact on the company or on the band or on my personal life or what have you. And so that I can be I'm narrowing in, and then I can feel like the conversations I'm having with the people that I'm collaborating on those projects with, because every one of my projects is a collaborative effort. I don't do a lot of solo projects. And that just is a little side note there. And so I want the conversations that I'm having to be more focused and with the other people that are involved. And so it's less about what can I cross off my list and more about how can I have more consistent, focused conversations with the people, the collaborators that I'm involved with, so that I can feel like we're making more meaningful impact and not just checking off a bunch of to-do lists or feeling this guilt about not getting enough of my to-do list done each day. Because I felt that way more than 6 months ago. I already felt that way about my to-do list. So I think I'm just being honest with myself about that.
So the last thing you said right there, being honest with yourself, I think this is actually the problem that we tend to have. Okay. So I have 50 things on my to-do list. My wife always kind of makes fun of me for this. She says I'm way too optimistic about what I can get done in a given day. And I think part of this is, me believing that I can fit more than I can and not prioritizing that list because I don't want to come to terms with the fact that I have to cut things off of it, right? That list actually needs to be shorter, which means I have to sacrifice something. And that's painful. It's painful to come to terms with the fact that, hey, you know what? The days are passing. And so I have to choose sometimes between two really good things. And sometimes that's a very personal choice. I have to choose between doing the work that I know I need to do and spending time with my 3-year-old, right? And both of those things are really important. So how do you choose? Well, if you never make the choice, then you don't have to confront that pain, but then you're stuck in this middle ground where your attention is split and you don't really do either one, right? It's almost it's almost attention procrastination.
Yeah.
You're trying to do both, but you're not really doing either one of them. You know what I mean?
It's a tricky one where you're in that state and we're kind of hemming and hawing over this or that, or even, or what you end up doing is distracting yourself with something else, right? And so you add, there's probably a number of things, if we're being honest with ourselves, that we silently add to our to-do list that we didn't sign up for at the beginning of the day or whatever we organize our to-do list, that we ended up doing but we didn't give ourselves credit for it necessarily at the end of the day when you look back at the checklist of all the things you did. Really, unless if you do that can be helpful. I'm like, okay, well, I started off, I had to get these 10 things done today, but I actually did 7 of those, and I did 5 other things that I didn't expect to do. And so then you can use that as maybe a way to like plan ahead, like, okay, I'm needing to carve out some more space for the unexpected things that may pop up, work, personal, what have you, that will pop up in the day, the unknowns, right? And so we don't know what we don't know. And so not everybody can just kind of close off to the whole world right now. And so something that might be interesting, but I can't remember who said this, but I feel like I heard something or read something a couple of years ago where some advice on how to prioritize things or how to make that decision. It's like, how would you, it's always, I think maybe one way to like illustrate this, like if it was someone came to you and said, hey, I'm kind of like weighing up the options of this or that to focus on how I focus some of my time over here and which one I prioritize, which one should I do? And like, how would you help them answer that question? And so you could think about it in that way and, think of like, well, how would I, advise someone else to do that? But then another way to do it is maybe to think of, that you could also just ask someone else for advice on which one is you think is for the good of that project or what have you. It feels like a more pressing thing because you're just not sure at the moment. And then maybe they'll kind of point you in the right direction. And so I think regardless of which, I think it's interesting because I've struggled with that sometimes as like the CEO of my company where I'm just like, I don't have a boss telling me focus on this right now. And so there's oftentimes I have to do that myself. And so that can be a little bit of a challenge, but sometimes I'll be like, okay, I'll talk to my fiance and be like, hey, just a quick little side thing. I'm kind of weighing these 2 things up. What do you think? And she might just help nudge me in one direction. I'm like, okay, I'll just go with that. And if I have a strong visceral reaction to it, then I'll know that wasn't the right answer and I'll go the other route. So I think it's like the whole flip a coin type of thing, but maybe just having to talk out loud to someone else can be maybe a helpful way to help navigate that.
So in addition to that, sometimes it's as simple as getting a piece of paper out for me, right? And listing these things out. Because like you said, there's these implicit things that end up landing on my to-do list or, and it is funny. When I talk to people about this, it's easy to talk broadly and to talk about principles or to, back way out, zoom way out and say, well, I want to be, kind of identity words, right? I want to be a good engineer. I want to be a good leader, a good manager, a good father, a good husband. Very rarely do we talk about, okay, what decisions did I make today or what decisions will I make tomorrow that will advance that specific thing that I want to be, right? How do I, we do this with our business all the time, right? How do we measure whether or not this was a good decision? How do we measure whether, and we come up with frameworks to even describe this, right? OKRs. What are the key results of making good decisions for our code? We don't do that so often with our identities or with our legacies or whatever the word is that you want to kind of fill in our purpose, right? How do we measure whether or not we consider ourselves successful in those endeavors? And I think part of that is because it's not about our own definitions. It's about the perception from others, right? So how do I measure if I'm a good father? It's not going to be something that I can say. It's going to be measured by, for example, my child and their future. And I don't know how I'm going to measure that. And so I wonder, if there's a way for us to, I don't know where that goes other than to say it's hard, right? It's difficult to know how we are doing on these different measures. There are things that I know that I want to do tactically. And it's the reason I went down this track is because you are focused on this at a very granular level, right? This to-dos. There are things that I want to accomplish today. And there are reasons that I want to accomplish those things.
And that sometimes those to-dos and the reasons were important previously, and they may or may not still feel as important or as impactful today. I think that to be a challenging thing too, is just being honest with ourselves that just sometimes things will feel important, think about meetings. You might have a meeting with your team and some to-dos come out of that list. And then maybe those couple of those to-dos are still lingering 3 months later. Are they even important anymore? Can you remove it? It's like we treat to-dos almost more in a way of like, if you open like a Jira ticket for like, oh, we should probably take care of this at some point. We're notorious in our industry for putting off things and eventually being like, okay, we're just not going to do this because it's a Jira ticket somewhere that's been sitting around for a while. I'm like, this isn't important anymore. It hasn't. There's been no chaos because we haven't taken care of this. But deleting that to do from your to-do list feels like such a hard, weird,
such a big commitment.
Like not doing this. And does that mean anyone else going to be upset that we decided not to do this? Do I need to communicate to everybody that we decided not to do this and why? And then you think about what all the other ramifications of not doing. Does that make you look like you're someone that doesn't follow through on things that you said you would do at one point? And so,
yeah, I
don't have an answer to that outside of it's an interesting little series of thoughts to kind of navigate. I think you're right though. It goes back to for me, it's more about, I think it might be easy enough for me to remove my own personal to-do item that I added for myself than a to-do that I said I would do in a team meeting a couple months ago, but have since just doesn't feel like it's even important, or I'm not even 100% sure what the purpose of it was anymore, to go and say, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to probably admit to the team that I forgot or don't understand, or just also maybe set an example that we don't follow through on things, even though I can probably list out hundreds of things that I said I would do that I've done. But that one little annoying to-do thing about updating the documentation about this with a better example, blah, 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 so that we don't have that problem again, I don't even remember why that came up on the to-do list. So
yeah, it's funny, actually, right after this call, I'm going to be talking with an engineer, and this engineer actually pointed out to me the idea that sometimes our ongoing tracking of ideas or ongoing tracking of discussions can become a little bit of a prison because we're reminding ourselves of what we once believed was true. And it's very difficult for us to stray from our own opinions. We have this idea of staying consistent with ourselves. Even if we kind of cognitively or logically can come to the conclusion that we were wrong, it's difficult to reject our own word. And so if we don't have a record of it, it's much easier for us to say, well, I never believed that, or I never said that, or that's not a position or an idea that I had necessarily. We're going to go this other direction, right? And his point was, and he made it much more concisely, he said that the good ideas will come back.
It's true.
And this was his kind of justification for not keeping a endless backlog, right? That the good ideas are going to resurface, and we don't necessarily have to hold on to them. That if it's a good enough idea, it's going to revisit us whether we want it to or not.
That's a really interesting one, because then you can, just thinking, what's the ramifications of that type of approach, as well as then, like I think about, earlier we were talking about maintainable software, and like when the team identifies maybe some technical debt that needs to get addressed at some point. And so there might be, different teams have different ways of like documenting that or not. And so sometimes there might be the argument like, well, a pain point in the application will get brought up continuously, and then at some point we'll deal with it. But then at some point you're like, when do we decide, okay, now we're going to document it, or we're going to put it on the to-do list or what have you and take care of it? And because you can also set this weird cultural thing where people will complain about things, but then never write it down and say, we're going to prioritize it. So I think if you figure out where that balance in there is between not putting everything on a list where you have this growing backlog or this huge list of technical debt or things to take care of as a team, or and not doing it at all, because leaning on the idea that it'll resurface, but like what happens when it resurfaces so much that you need to deal with that. Because it's always interesting as you go back to also with when you bring in consultants or new hires, where do they go look for like, hey, I'm curious about this weird area of the code base. This seems like a messy thing. And like, oh yeah, we haven't committed to taking care of it, but it gets brought up. Like, I don't know what kind of message that sends to that person either. I don't have the right answer there. It's an interesting, I think, challenge for teams to kind of navigate like what the procedures are going to look like and how they honor the to-dos and commitments that they're making as a team.
Yeah. It is a balance, and I think everybody has to find their own. But I think one thing is certainly true, that if we hide from what we know to be true, then we're bound to face frustration and difficulty. And if we're avoiding things like focus, right? If we're trying to do too much in one day and we are not able to focus, that's detrimental to everything that we try to do. Robby, thank you so much for taking the time with me again today. I have one last question that we can wrap up with here. If you had only 30 seconds to provide advice to engineers of all backgrounds and of all experience levels, what would you tell them?
Give me a second to think about this one. All right, so if I had 30 seconds to answer this question, and I've already used 5 seconds, I would probably advise them to work on a good habit of ending their day with some sort of ritual that involves capturing where they're at, but kind of giving them some indicators on how they should start their next workday so that they can show up with their cup of coffee or tea or water in the morning and they've kind of left themselves a note and know where to kind of get up and get going again. So I think that help reduce your reboot time in the morning by coming up with an end of day. So that way you can hopefully end the day not worrying about those last few little things that float around in your mind later in the evening, so you can enjoy your personal time and maybe have a good night's sleep.
That is excellent advice, and it's certainly something that I would advocate for as well. Giving yourself kind of it's like a cheat sheet. It's difficult to reload in your brain if you think about your brain as kind of RAM, right? And you've filled it up with everything that happened since the workday yesterday, and you're trying to figure out where in the world, where are you at? And you can spend the first 2 or 3 hours just getting back to where you were yesterday. That's great advice. Robby, thank you so much for joining me on Developer Tea.
Yeah, it's been such a delight, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Developer Tea. Another huge thank you to Robby Russell for joining me on this show. Head over to Planet Argon to learn a little bit more about what he and his company do. Of course, if you aren't using OH-MY-ZSH yet, go and check it out. It's pretty cool. I use it every day. I've used it for years now, and I really appreciate the work that Robby put into that. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Thank you to New Relic for sponsoring today's episode of Developer Tea. New Relic is observability made simple. newrelic.com. And of course, it's free to get started. Thank you so much for listening to the show. This episode and every other episode of Developer Tea can be found at spec.fm. And a huge thank you to you for sharing this show, for sharing this episode with someone that you believe would be positively impacted by it. That's the thing that keeps this show going. Today's episode was produced by Sarah Jackson. My name is Jonathan Cottrell, and until next time, enjoy your tea.